My name is Bill Irvin. I am 36 years old and own my own business as a building contractor. My business is small, with just 4 employees, including an accountant, and an old shed that houses my equipment, building materials, and a small office. My wife Sarah works as a licensed real estate broker for a local firm and does a pretty good job at it. I primarily build upscale custom homes that are always in demand despite the ups and downs of the economy. The two of us earn 6 figures every year. Sarah is the same age as me, and we went to high school together. We learned that we both liked sex. The back seat of my old car was badly damaged. It wasn't obvious at the time, although we thought we were in love, it was just passion. We both enjoyed sex and felt comfortable doing it with each other to the exclusion of everyone else. I would like to point out that Sarah was a late bloomer and didn't really start to acquire those amazing feminine qualities like breasts and figure until her junior year when we started dating together. When it started to develop, it was like watching a rose emerge from its bud into the sunlight, and I, like most guys, was very grateful for the results. I was, of course, glad that I discovered it first. In senior year, a lot of guys started hitting on her, but I wasn't used to the lustful attention from email users, so she decided to stay with me for protection, I guess. By the time we graduated, she was enjoying her newfound popularity and, to my horror, began flirting with other guys. However, we knew that our relationship would end when we graduated. She was going to attend her father's alma mater at an out-of-state university because her parents could afford out-of-state tuition. My parents weren't as wealthy, and I wasn't as academically inclined, so I had to attend a local community college and major in small business management. My father was a carpenter, and I enjoyed working with him on construction projects during the summer holidays, but he wanted me to start my own business. Anyway, she left for college, and the breakup was hard because we were used to having sex quite often and thought we were in love. From time to time, I tried to visit her in my old car, but we gradually grew apart. I didn't see her too much for 4 years until we met at the CW bar in a city I loved visiting. There was line dancing and also music, which I liked, and I met quite a few girls there. I made pretty good money, then worked in construction, gained experience, and did minor repairs and remodeling on the weekends in preparation for starting my own business. I was standing with my buddy Drew at the bar with long neck Bud when Drew, who was facing the door, nudged me with his elbow and motioned with his head to look behind me. Drew and I are going back to elementary school, and he knew about my previous relationship with Sarah. Looking over my shoulder, I saw her. Sarah stood near the door with 2 other girls, looking around the place. I think they were here for the first time and were checking out the area, as we all do when we find ourselves in new territory. She looked incredible. If anything, it has improved with age. Suddenly, as she looked towards the bar, I saw a look of recognition appear on her face, and a smile lit up her face as she walked towards me, gesturing for her friends to follow me. "Bill, it's been a long time," she said, hugging me and kissing me on the cheek. "It's good to see you again, Sarah," I said, returning her hug enthusiastically. "You remember Drew, don't you?" "Yeah, sure. Hi, Drew. These are my friends, Sally and Remai." Sally was a tall, slender redhead, and Remai was a cheerful, well-developed blonde. Both girls seemed a little nervous about being in the CW Barden's hall. "Hey guys, want to get a table?" I asked, trying to calm them down. Approaching a table near the dance floor, I noticed that all the guys were watching us with their eyes. Once seated, I caught the attention of one of the waitresses and ordered our drinks. Drew waved to his buddy to join us, and we quickly settled into another round of introductions until the drinks arrived. Sarah and I began updating each other on the latest events in our lives over the past 4 years. As we talked, I felt like I was responding to her in a way that I had never done with any other girl before, and in the back of my mind there seemed to be a chant repeating, "This is the one, this is the one, this is the one." I think she heard it too because she put her hand on my shoulder and kept it there while we were talking. I learned that she had just completed her BUSAD degree and had accepted a job with one of our largest real estate firms in the city. She was taking a training program and hoped to get her license within the next year. Sally and Remai were friends from college who were visiting for the weekend. She admitted that it was their first time at the CW bar, but they heard it was a good place to meet guys, so they decided to give it a try. Squeezing my hand and looking into my eyes, she told me, "I'm glad we decided to come here." "I'm just as glad, Sarah," I answered. We spent the rest of the evening dancing and talking. Other guys tried to intervene, but she just told them no and stayed next to me, holding hands unless we were dancing. It was obvious that we were going to become an item. I was currently living in my apartment, and later that evening we all adjourned there, where we hung out together for a while, and then the others left. Drew winked at me as he walked away arm in arm with Remai. They seemed to get along very well that evening. Our long-term relationship began that night. The sex was as good as ever, and Sarah admitted that she had been intimate with a couple of guys in college, but she thought I was a better lover. She never wanted to discuss her college years, and I really didn't want to know. By that time, I was so in love with her that I did not want to know anything that could disturb the feeling of euphoria that bubbled up in me when I was with her. Besides, I was doing this myself, so I couldn't blame her for something I did. Of course, I had sex with other girls and learned a thing or two. We met with Drew and Remai twice. They too became a part of each other, and being mutual friends, it seemed appropriate to hang out together. I was not surprised that they announced their engagement a few months after they met. I felt that Sarah and I had almost reached that point in our relationship, and I was going to buy her an engagement ring. I talked to Drew about the possibility of a double wedding, but Drew told me that Remai wanted a wedding in her hometown, where her parents still live. He also told me that Remai had admitted that while she, Sarah, and Sally were in college, they were the favorites of the fraternity students on campus due to their willingness to participate in group sexual activities. He didn't go into detail, but I got the gist. He said that Remai wants to start their married life without the fear that someone from her past might show up and try to blackmail her. Drew said he was more than happy with her promise to be faithful to him and their marriage in the future. I wondered if Sarah hadn't been honest about her past, but given my own love life, I decided not to discuss it with her. Still, it bothered me because my story seemed pretty tame compared to hers, and I had a few uncomfortable moments before our wedding remembering what Drew had told me. When I finally proposed, Sarah was delighted. We were at the Outback Steakhouse in a secluded booth, and, while enjoying coffee after a hearty dinner, I pulled out a small box with a ring. Her eyes went wide when she saw it, and when I opened the box and she saw the engagement ring I had chosen, she squealed with joy. Some of the other customers who could see us smiled when I put the ring on her finger and proposed. "Sarah, will you marry me?" Oh yeah, I agree. Oh, I'm so excited. Yes, my dear, I will marry you," she exclaimed as I approached her and sat down next to her, taking her into my arms. We kissed to the applause of the customers and staff around us who witnessed the event. We were a little embarrassed when we broke the hug and nodded to those around us. The attention we attracted soon subsided, and we continued drinking our coffee and talking in low voices. Every now and then the waiter would come and refill our coffee, but otherwise we were left in our own world, exchanging tender kisses. I don't know why, but I suddenly remembered what Drew told me about Sarah, Remai, and Sally, and decided that this might be the best time to make my position on fidelity in our marriage. "Sarah," I said with a light kiss to her lips, "you understand that this is forever. I promise to be faithful to you for the rest of my life. There will be no one else. I love you too, Bill, and I will love you for the rest of my life. We are forever. There will be no one else for me," she returned my kiss. That night we said our vows to each other, and I knew that our wedding would only be a formality. I felt calm and hoped that I could get rid of the doubts that sometimes tormented me. Our wedding took place about 4 months later, and we went on a honeymoon to Maui for a week. Then they returned to work. I built my business, and she returned to her job. Of course, she moved in with me a few weeks before the wedding, so we didn't have much change in our lives now that we were husband and wife. When we were together, we indulged in love and passion, and any doubts I had dissolved in our passion and commitment to each other. We made it a goal in our marriage to continue living in an apartment so we could save money and build our own home in 5 years, and then think about parenthood. It only took us 4 years to have our own home, and a year later we had our first child, a girl we named Betsy Ann after our mothers. 2 years later our son was born, and we named him Jason Michael after our fathers. While the children were young, Sarah reduced her work hours to be a stay-at-home mom. Sarah has always been a health freak, and after having her children, she became interested in fitness and managed to maintain the figure she had when we married. She was still a sexy lady and often dressed the part. Sometimes it was awkward to be with her in public places and watch other men's reactions. Life was good. Our family structure revolved around our children, and the rest revolved around my business. Even though we had been married for several years, my love for Sarah was as strong as the day I decided she was the one. Our sex life might have suffered a little, but I believed that the frequency of our intimate relationships was more than sufficient. Moreover, she left me with the impression that she returned my love and was pleased with our bedroom affairs. From time to time, I remembered what Ramai Drew had said about her and Sarah's promiscuity in college, and being the kind of person who doesn't like unpleasant surprises, I checked her out cautiously, but never found anything that suggested impropriety. Of course, being a real estate agent, she had a lot of flexibility in her work schedule and hours that I couldn't keep track of, but I was satisfied. The social side of our lives was closely tied to our friendship with Drew and Rimai as our best friends. Of course, we had other acquaintances, but we almost exclusively communicated with them. We organized joint vacations and met often during the month. Friday night was always a planned dinner followed by dancing at one of the best clubs in town. Drew and Rimai had 2 children a couple years older than ours, but they loved to play with ours, so our summer backyard barbecues were happy times. A couple times a year, I traveled to building conferences in other states to stay on top of the latest trends in new materials and accessories that helped sell luxury homes. I was always glad that Sarah could turn to Drew if she had a problem while I was away. Drew worked as an electrician for a local contractor, and I would occasionally hire him on some of my jobs. I thought about hiring him to work with me, but I thought it might interfere with our friendship. Ramai worked in the administrative office of a local hospital as an administrative assistant, and I think was hoping to take over as an administrator when he retired. She was a very smart woman, and I thought how lucky Drew was to marry her, even though she had gained a few pounds after having kids. As we approached our mid-30s, Sarah began hinting that she would like to stop taking birth control pills, and since we had decided not to have any more children, one of us was to have surgery so that pregnancy would no longer be an issue. Besides, she said, I worry about the long-term effects of taking them all the time, and Ramai told me that Drew had a vasectomy, and she feels much better without taking the pills. Okay, honey, I have to go to a builders conference in Omaha next week, and I'll think about it and give you an answer when I get back. Thank you, Bill. I'd really appreciate your understanding. I'll show you how much I appreciate it tonight. And she really showed. A couple of days later, I had the opportunity to talk to Drew about his vasectomy, and after listening to him and his experience, I decided I would do it too. I wasn't going to tell Sarah, though. Since it was a simple outpatient procedure, I decided to surprise her and have it done during the conference. With that in mind, I said goodbye to my family a few days later and headed to Omaha for a conference. Sarah was a little upset as she didn't like to sleep alone, but we assured each other of our love with a goodbye kiss, and I was on my way. In Omaha, I looked up a doctor in the phone book who advertised a quick, painless vasectomy and called his office. I was glad that he had an appointment for the next day, which included an initial assessment. When I explained that I was only in town for a couple of days and wanted to surprise my wife, the secretary assured me that if everything went well on the first visit, she would try to fit me into the schedule the next day for the procedure itself. This suited me, and I made an appointment for the next morning. I went to bed that night in a good mood, even after my usual evening call to Sarah, which had gone well, and I was thinking how happy she would be when she could stop taking the pill. I slept poorly that night, thinking about the operation, and after a light breakfast, I headed to the doctor whose office was in a medical complex nearby. After filling out all the forms, including providing my medical history, the nurse took my blood pressure, weighed me, and took a blood sample, and then, after a short wait, the doctor entered the small exam room. It was an older gentleman who immediately put me at ease, explaining that the procedure was very simple and that I would be given local anesthesia, which would make it virtually painless. This was pretty much what Drew told me, and I was still a little nervous, but I decided to go for it anyway. He told me that he usually asks his patients to provide a sample before surgery to have a baseline for comparison afterward, so I would need to provide a sample before I left the office. I didn't expect this, in fact I had never thought about it, but the nurse treated it like a routine procedure as she took me into a small room, handed me a sample bottle, and said as she closed the door behind me, "That's all you need. You will find it here." The doctor returned a few minutes later and told me that there was a laboratory in the complex and he would ask them to expedite the testing of my samples. He asked me to leave a phone number where I could be reached, but if I didn't hear from him, I should plan to come in for the procedure the next day. I left my cell phone number with the nurse and headed to the convention center. Later in the day, I received a call from the doctor on my cell phone, which made me very upset. After he introduced himself, the doctor continued to report the results of my analysis. "Mr. Irwin, I need to inform you that your test results are negative. You don't need a vasectomy because you are already sterile. You can't have children." I was stunned for several moments before I could answer. How is this possible? I see from the medical history you filled out that you had mumps as a child. This could be the cause of your condition. I remember it was a mild case of illness. Was that enough to make me sterile? I can't say for sure, Mr. Irwin, but you can confirm our findings with your doctor when you get home. In the meantime, I have canceled your appointment for tomorrow, since the operation in your case does not make sense. Let us know if there is anything else we can do to help. "Thank you, doctor," I said, hanging up the phone with my thoughts full of confusion, and then it dawned on me. If I'm sterile, then who is Betsy and Jason's father? Before taking any action, I needed to go home and confirm that I was sterile before doing anything else. I didn't want to make a mistake that could destroy my family. Realizing that I would not be able to function properly until I received confirmation, I immediately called and changed my reservations to a return flight for that evening. I arrived at our home airport around 9:30 p.m., picked up my car in the parking lot, and checked into a nearby hotel. I did a lot of thinking and planning after I calmed down and decided not to return home until I confirmed my sterility. If I came home early, I'd have to explain why, and I didn't want Sarah to suspect anything until I was sure. The next day, I went to the local clinic and asked to be tested. I didn't want to use our family doctor so that the information wouldn't accidentally get back to Sarah. After going through the registration process, I was again given a sample bottle and taken to a room where I eventually provided an adequate sample. The clinic said it usually takes 2 days to get results, and I said I would pay extra to speed up the process. They said the sample was being sent to a lab a few miles away, but they could express it and get the results the next day if I wanted. I asked them to act as quickly as possible and gave them my cell phone number with instructions to call only that number. I will return the next day to collect the test results and pay the bill. I spent the rest of the day in the hotel room to minimize the chance of being noticed by acquaintances who might mention this to Sarah. I ate dinner at a nearby diner, and when it got dark, I decided to check out what Sarah was doing while she thought I was away. I was thinking about what Ramai told Drew about her and Sarah's promiscuous behavior in college, and I wondered if it had something to do with what happened to Sarah. Perhaps she was bored with our married life and decided to diversify it. Having once tasted the wild life in college, she could not forget about it. I drove to our house and parked a few houses up the street where I could watch who was coming and going. The sky threatened rain, and I saw lightning in the distance. Based on the direction of the wind, It seemed that the storm was heading this way. I usually called around 7 p.m. when I was out of town and was planning to call at my normal time on my cell phone when I saw Drew's car pull into my driveway. I couldn't see who was driving, but I assumed it was Drew. I wondered what could have happened that she had to call him. But then I saw the garage door lift and he pulled inside into my parking space. I watched with growing confidence that my best friend was cheating on me with my wife as the garage door closed behind him. Before I unleash my rage, I had to be sure of this. I'll try to remain objective until I know for sure, but something is seriously wrong in my life, and I felt like I was getting closer to a definitive answer. Is Drew the father of my children? I would need to establish paternity if my sterility was confirmed, so I had to proceed cautiously until I was sure. Before taking any steps, I decided to make my call at 7 p.m., so I called home. Sarah answered almost immediately. "Hey, honey, you're right on time. How's it going?" Trying to speak in a normal tone, I replied. "Everything is going well. Nothing particularly new, but I did find some interesting new tiles. Bring me a sample if it looks good. I'm thinking about updating the guest bathroom." "Okay, how are things going for you?" "It's okay. The kids are spending the night at my parents' place. They wanted to spend the night with them. It must be pretty lonely being home alone. Aren't you scared?" I had to tease her a little bit because I knew Drew was there. "No, I'll set the alarm and everything will be fine. Too bad you're not around. I think I hear thunder. Good night in this lonely bed. We'll talk tomorrow night. Bye." I interrupted her and wondered if she had noticed that I hadn't said, "I love you." I had to be careful until I received confirmation of my sterility the next day. It would be bad if I rashly ruined a good marriage with false accusations. Still, the evidence was there. Drew had been at our house with Sarah for over half an hour. The fact that they hit his car when he arrived was evidence of something more than just a clogged drain. I continued to sit and watch our house as the storm approached and began to consider my next steps. It looks like Drew might be the father of our children if I really am sterile. This meant that she had been cheating on me for at least 6 years, and possibly longer. The fact that she got pregnant by another man meant that she didn't respect me. Of course, if she didn't know I was sterile and assumed the babies might be mine, that meant she was having sex with Drew or someone else without a condom without worrying about getting pregnant, and that was just as disrespectful. So our marriage could not survive. The funny thing is that I never noticed this disrespect during the years of marriage, and either she was a very good actress or she really loved me, but could separate herself from that love and have sex with someone else, even risking getting pregnant from him. If the test shows that I am indeed sterile, I will need to take DNA samples from Betsy and Jason and compare them to my DNA and Drew's DNA. I'll need to somehow get a sample of it. With the results of these tests, I will be able to confront Sarah and perhaps get answers to the question, why? I will need this to consummate my marriage. It had been 2 hours since I saw Drew come into our house, and it started to rain as the lightning got closer. I realized it was time to make a decision. Should I go in and confront Sarah and Drew, or wait for the test results? I decided to leave and wait for the test results, but the evidence seemed incriminating. Besides, I needed to go to the bathroom urgently, and I didn't see anything that could save our marriage. She cheated on me for years and gave me her lover's children to raise. I will check the test results tomorrow and then take action if they confirm that I am infertile. There is no point in waiting for the results of DNA tests on children. I just want to get this all over with as soon as possible. I had about 15 hours to plan my actions, and when I was confident, I acted quickly and decisively. The next afternoon, I was in my hotel room, listlessly watching daytime TV when my cell phone rang. "Mr. Irwin?" "Yes, this is Bill Irwin." "Mr. Irwin, we have received your test results from the laboratory. Do you want to find out the results over the phone or come to the clinic?" "Tell me now and I'll come by later to pick up a copy of the report." "It turns out that you are practically sterile, Mr. Irwin." "Thanks. That's all I need to know. I'll come by soon to pick up a copy. Okay, we're open until 6 p.m. Here it is. I needed to accept the fact that my marriage was over. I couldn't live with a woman who so subtly disrespected and cheated on me. The children I considered mine were now someone else's responsibility. It's time to find a lawyer, close accounts, and take all necessary steps to get a divorce. Further thoughts about DNA testing of children disappeared, replaced by rage and a thirst for revenge that overshadowed rational thinking. I immediately called our attorney's office to get a recommendation for a divorce attorney. After receiving the names of 2 divorce lawyers, I called one of them and made an appointment for the next day. I then called our bank, brokerage, and insurance agency to set up appointments for the next day and begin the process of separating our finances. Emotional separation will be much more difficult and traumatic. I loved Sarah for many years, and it was difficult to turn off this feeling as quickly as a material connection. I just couldn't understand why she did it, but I hoped that during the divorce process we could talk and she would tell me the reason. This is probably partly due to her wild days in college, and she couldn't calm down with marital sex. Maybe I'll never know. I always thought she was happy with me as a lover, husband, and father, but apparently I missed something along the way. So here I am, trying to cope with the betrayal of my wife, who gave birth to children that I did not conceive. The next day was stressful for me. I went to the bank, closed the credit cards, closed and opened new accounts to separate our funds, and then went to our broker to do the same. I went to our insurance agent and removed Sarah and the children as my beneficiaries, and finally to my lawyer to change my will. The entire time I did this, I received sympathetic glances and shakes of heads, but no one challenged my decision. I did what I had a legal right to do, so no one could say anything against it. When I got to the divorce lawyer, I was tired but ready for the last step. I explained my situation to him and told him what I wanted. "Mr. Irwin, have you talked to your wife about this?" "No, I can't look her in the eye without hurting her physically. I just want a quick divorce without alimony or maintenance. Let her look for the father of her children for alimony, and she makes the same amount as I have some years, so there is no need for alimony. It looks like you have some evidence of her infidelity, as these reports show that you are practically sterile, but this may not be absolute proof if you want a divorce on the grounds of infidelity. DNA tests will confirm your claims, but if you don't want to wait for this, you can use irreconcilable differences as a basis. If it's fast, that's what I want, but I don't need more tests to confirm in my mind," I said with righteous indignation. "Okay, I'll start the paperwork and submit it tomorrow morning. It should be ready for service tomorrow afternoon." "That sounds good," I said, getting ready to leave. Before I left, I told him where Sarah worked and when she would be home to meet Betsy and Jason from school, so they would know where to find her. I left the lawyer's office feeling incredibly sad. The euphoria and excitement I had felt that morning to get back at Sarah seemed to have evaporated. It dawned on me that I had just cut myself off from the children I had raised and the family I had valued for so long. As I got into the car, my cell phone rang, and I checked who it was before answering. It was Sarah, so I just let the call go to voicemail. She sounded a little upset and worried. "Bill, what's going on? I tried to use our joint credit card, and it was declined. Do you know anything about this? I tried to call your hotel in Omaha, and they said you checked out the day before yesterday. Where are you? Please call. Darling, I'm afraid something is wrong." It's begun, I thought, deleting her message and turning off the phone. Things will only get worse from now on. I couldn't shake the heavy feeling of sadness that hung over me like a dark cloud as I walked back to my motel. This feeling did not leave me for the rest of the day, and at night I had difficulty falling asleep. The next morning, I called my construction site foreman and told him I was back in town and would be visiting them later in the morning. I decided that I would need to buy a new phone with a different number in order to continue working and avoid contact with Sarah. After breakfast, I stopped at the store, bought a new phone, and threw the old one in the glove compartment. When I arrived at the construction site, I checked the progress of the work, and then decided to go home and pack my things while Sarah was at work and the children were at school. I needed to quickly find a furnished apartment to have somewhere to live. Before leaving, I gave the foreman my new phone number and asked him not to give it to Sarah. When I arrived at the house, Sarah's car was gone, so I pulled into the garage and went into the house to start gathering short-term supplies. We needed to divide the property before the final division of our material assets. I was in our bedroom, putting clothes into 2 suitcases that I took from the attic when I heard a voice behind me. "You weren't even going to say goodbye?" Sarah returned home to pick up some forgotten documents and found me. I was instantly shocked. "I didn't plan for our meeting so soon." Hi, Sarah. "I didn't expect you to be home." "Obviously, Bill," she replied sarcastically. "Now tell me what's going on." I tried to make calls until my cell phone battery ran out, and now I want an answer. I thought it would be better to explain everything right away. "Sarah, remember before I left for Omaha, we talked about me getting a vasectomy?" "Yes, I remember." "Well, while I was in Omaha, I decided to surprise you and have the procedure done there since I found out it was a simple and painless operation. Before the operation, the doctor took a sample from me and found that I was sterile. How could I have 2 children and be sterile? I returned to the city earlier and took another test here, which confirmed the results of the test in Omaha. Now will you tell me who is the father of our children? I really want to know. I suspect it's Drew, or maybe you weren't following it because you thought you were back in college," I said mockingly. Her face turned red as she listened to my story, and when I finished, she screamed at me. "There is only one father for these children, and that is you. I've never cheated on you. Before our wedding, we promised to be faithful to each other, and I have never been with another man." "Then how can a sterile man have children, and why was Drew here that night and didn't leave?" "I don't know why you're sterile. Have you talked to the doctor? It wasn't Drew that night, it was Ramai. You know how nervous I get at night when you're not around, and there's a thunderstorm, so she came and slept in the guest room." "Why didn't you tell me she was here when I called that night?" "I didn't want you to think that I was such a big coward that I needed someone to support me." I was beginning to feel like I might have overestimated the whole situation, but like any husband, I couldn't give up without a fight. "Damn, why talk to the doctor? As far as I know, you are either sterile or you are not. I had mumps as a child, and this was probably the reason. This means that I was always sterile and could not be the father of your children." "Well, get used to the idea that these are your children, because no other man has ever been inside me, and it wasn't a virgin birth." I was confused. We were shouting at each other, and my throat was already starting to hurt. "Okay, let's calm down. There must be a reasonable reason for this," I said in a conciliatory tone. "Now we'll go pick up the children from school and go to the clinic to take DNA samples from you and the children. After that, we'll go to Dr. Klein and ask him how you can be sterile and still have children. But don't doubt it, honey, these are your children." It didn't sound like the words of someone who was lying or bluffing, and I began to get the uneasy feeling that I might be jumping to conclusions that I couldn't prove in an argument. I obediently followed her to the car and sat quietly while we went to pick up the children. The school didn't ask any questions as we picked up Betsy and Jason and headed to the clinic. I could tell Sarah was upset because her lips were tightly pursed, and she was driving with determination. The children were puzzled by what was happening, but knew that something was wrong, so they hardly said anything. I took the kids to the clinic for DNA samples, while Sarah called Dr. Klein on her cell phone so she could speak briefly with the doctor. She knew the secretary and was able to get 15 minutes for an appointment that same day. The clinic said the lab test results wouldn't be back for at least 2 days, but I was beginning to think that this would be a foregone conclusion that Betsy and Jason were mine. As I looked at them closely, I began to notice an obvious family resemblance that I had not noticed before. After returning the children to school, we drove home in silence. I wanted to say something, but she just said that we'll talk when we get home. Things were looking pretty bleak, and I was on the verge of admitting my guilt, although I thought I had acted correctly under the circumstances. If only she weren't so sure of her position that the children are mine. When we got home, she parked the car in the driveway and left it there. I followed her inside, but didn't say anything, not wanting to escalate the situation until the matter was resolved. "We need to talk." She started coldly and led me to the kitchen. Sitting down across the table from each other, she began. "Bill, do you want a divorce?" I thought for a moment before answering. If it turns out that the children are not mine and you were unfaithful, then yes, but if it turns out to be a terrible mistake, then no, I don't want a divorce. "That's fair, but it bothers me that you immediately assumed I was unfaithful and started the divorce process without talking to me first. It seems like you were just looking for an excuse to leave this marriage and this family." I knew I had to be careful. It would be a couple more days before the DNA test results were ready to confirm my stupidity, and I didn't want to damage our relationship any further. It was time to say something nice. "Sarah, I may not say this often, but I love you very much and cannot imagine my life without you and the children. When I found out about my sterility, I probably went crazy and did all this without thinking about the consequences. In hindsight, I should have waited and talked to you before taking any action. Let's talk to the doctor this afternoon and see if he can explain how I can be sterile and still have children. You have no idea how depressed I was when I thought that you had cheated on me and that Betsy and Jason were not my children. I apologize to you for not talking to you first." She sat and listened while I spoke, but I noticed that her tension began to subside when I finished. "Okay, let's have lunch and then go to the doctor." She didn't say anything else, but started preparing dinner. I knew she hadn't made a final judgment yet, and I hoped that was a good sign as we ate in silence. Shortly after arriving at the doctor's office, we were invited into one of the examination rooms. When the doctor joined us, I explained to him that I had learned that I was sterile and showed him the test results. Then I told him that my wife firmly claims that I am the father of our children. He reviewed the test results and looked at my medical records. "If you are indeed the father of your children, then there was some event or illness after their birth that could have affected your life," the doctor noted. Suddenly, Sarah spoke. "Do you remember last summer when you played softball with the team from work? You were the shortstop and a line drive was thrown towards you, but the ball bounced and hit you right between your legs. You didn't wear a protective bandage, and you were sick there for a week. I tried to get you to go to the doctor, but you didn't go." I suddenly remembered this incident and was immediately taken aback that I had not thought about it in the past few days. Oh God, that could be the reason. I didn't even think about it. What a fool I was. "Doctor, could this be the cause of my problem?" "It could damage the channels. We need to run tests to determine the cause, but yes, this case could make you sterile. Over time, this may partially improve." "Oh my God," I moaned. "What have I done?" Sarah just sat there and looked at me. "DNA tests confirmed that Betsy and Jason are indeed my children. I also still got a vasectomy just in case. Over time, Sarah forgave me. Perhaps this incident showed her that I have a very low tolerance for her infidelity. Of course, I remained coy for a while longer until she decided she wanted me to stay. The most frustrating part of it all was having to go back and correct the changes in our financial status. I think some of the ladies at the bank and insurance company guessed why I wanted our accounts back the way they were and couldn't help but let out little smiles of satisfaction. The one thing I'm really grateful for is that I never confronted my friend Drew with my suspicions. I can only hope that Sarah never tells Ramai what I did. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the